Yes. Could you get me the federal funds rate in each and every nation of the world? Yes. Now, I know that China has a Federal Reserve Bank. Yes. And I'm kind of concerned because these enumerated rights, known as the humanitarian rights, yeah, there's some refusal in the United States to enforce them. Now, the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, isn't that right? Yeah. Why don't you get me the individuals that have control of the monetary supply of China? And then there's the Federal Reserve note. Yes. The paper currency in circulation in the United States. Now, in China, it's the yuan, isn't it? The yuan. Yes. And I just looked at some of these reports, and there's a possibility that you don't have any money over there. Now, I know if you were Chinese, yes, you thought, well, we've been stabilizing the yuan using a sterilization of buying American. Well, well, I'm kind of thinking that somebody, yes, had decided that they'd participate in all these international meetings about the conventions of the United Nations or the Vienna Conventions or some of these others. Yes. And then when it came time to actually enforce them, there seems to be some reluctance. Oh. Now, Convention for the Protection of Individuals, yes. And then the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance. Now, I had mentioned this once before. When you arrest me for a crime that I didn't commit in Sequim, Washington, yeah, that's forced disappearance. Poop. It's a little different than what you were thinking because quite often when the government gets upset at you, yes, they make up reasons on why you have to be arrested and put in jail. Yes, and then they make you do fraudulent mental health evaluations, right? Because the government, known as the police department, refuses to admit that I was not in Sequim, Washington. Yes. Uh huh. And then I gave them the evidence that I was on the bus that morning, that I had committed no crime. Yes. And they wouldn't admit the evidence. Pooch. Now that's forced disappearance of an American citizen. Yes. That seems to have informed law enforcement. Yes. That when I'm not in a city, I really wasn't there. Oh. Now, I know that anytime you use forgery, yes, just like this, that's a forgery. And Superior Court Brent Basden, pooch. If this is a forgery or this is a forgery, yes, you've been using individuals that are not yourself as an imposter while sitting on the bench. Now, I have the right to not be forced into disappearing. Yes, when I respond, I just want notice of the court hearing, and you put me in jail for 27 days, Judge Porter. Pooch. And then you made me have a mental health evaluation where I told the individual there was no jurisdiction because Clallam County wouldn't admit the evidence that I wasn't in Sequim. And then you refused to allow me to sue the court, yes, for false arrest, yes, false imprisonment, yes. And then when I communicated, you decided to force my disappearance for 27 days, yes. Now, we had another experience, didn't we, Phyllis? Pooh, where you were going to force my disappearance to a mental facility? Yes. And you were going to say that at least one of the charges is serious. The court should find that Mr. Budding's is not competent to stand trial. And you should inpatient psychiatric treatment me so that I'm forced to receive forced medication. Yes. So that you could force my disappearance. Yes. Into a mental institution where I don't have any family or friends right now. Now, for a year and a half, chief of police, I told you to admit the evidence that I haven't been cyber stalking. Right. And I wasn't in Brennan, Washington. Yes. And I never emailed anybody in the Sequim, the Quilcene School District. Right. Or the Brennan School District. But you did want to force my disappearance. You remember that cell hearing? Yes. Well, there's an international convention for the protection of every person throughout every nation of the world. Where when you make up fraudulent crimes, yes, for violating fraudulent protection orders, yes, because of the fraudulent dissolution of marriage, yes, because you want to force the disappearance of persons, yes, to mental institutions because you refuse to admit the evidence. That happens to violate the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances. Now, China doesn't seem to want to enforce this because I have not been able to speak to any person in the United States of America. What do you fuckers think you were doing? Poop! You made up a fraudulent two-count criminal complaint. Yes, I was sitting in front of the Masonic Temple. Yes, I sent you 13 videos from there. Yes, I was at the senior center that afternoon. And then it was a Friday, and I went to the community dinner at 5:30. Yes. Now, exactly when did this crime take place? You know, fraudulent allegations of violating the restraint provisions of a fraudulent protection order because of the fraudulent dissolution of marriage. Your answer to your problems was the forced disappearance of myself to a mental institution. Do you think I have a case, Brent? Do you think I have a case? Now, I'm wanting to use these international courts of law. Yes. And when I mentioned them, you said, well, they have no jurisdiction, but they do. See, when I talked to Phyllis, right, I explained to her, yes, that it does violate the Women's Act. Yes, it does. Because as you can read in this email, before you issue a permanent protection order, yes, the respondent has to receive notice and the opportunity to be heard before there's a permanent protection order. Now, Jack, my public defender, yes, that said, no, we can actually issue it without Mr. Budnick receiving any notice or opportunity to be heard. You can't. It violates U.S. Code 2265B2. Pooh. See, this means that you can issue a protection order if there's a credible allegation of domestic violence or there's an arrest. Has provided with no even if the hearing has not yet been held. Yes. Now, as long as there will be an opportunity to be heard within a reasonable period of time before a final order is issued. Yes. Now you're saying I'm wrong again? Poop. Now, I mentioned Guam, yes, and I mentioned the recommendations of the evaluator, yes. Now, in 2011, Brent Baisden, poop, you decided that you would just issue the fucking thing right now. Now, I'm going to have you tried in international courts. And if I have to pay to make sure that every election of the world, yes, is legal, done according to the requirements of the election commissions of the various nations, I will personally employ to make sure that these international conventions are enforced. Now, as much as Israel might dislike me at this moment, Netanyahu, I want you to understand, President, I have said in the past that I will bankrupt that little rock called Israel. Yes, because you're not moving fucking embassies right now. Now, somehow I think that Xi Jinping, yes, was wanting a war in the Middle East far from China because certain politicians throughout the world seem to think that a war is an answer to their monetary economic problems. Now, as much as we wouldn't want to blame the President of the United States, yes, to think that the Chinese army wouldn't want to take a side in the Middle East conflict right now, I think they now, Xi Jinping might have a supercomputer on the text 5G, yes, in a secret location that the Chinese military did not know everything. Because for any world leader to think, oh my gosh, my nation's going bankrupt, I'm running out of money, let's arrange it that the United States has to defend Israel so that China could take the side of Iran and fight against the American side. Now, we would have a global war, World War Mother.